Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here today. Mark emailed me a few weeks ago and asked, do you think your talk is suitable for finishing the conference? And I said, Mark, my talk is ideal. It's the perfect talk to finish Beyond Tellerrand, because the first half of my talk, I'm going to bring everybody down. I'm going to talk about surveillance and how the internet's making us inhuman and how everything's getting bad. But then, like a real American motivational speaker, the second half of the talk, I'm going to bring everybody back up. And we're all going to get pumped and motivated, and at the end, we're just going to burst out the doors, raise the red flag, and start changing the world. But as I was preparing my talk, I had a lot of material, and unfortunately, I'm only going to be able to deliver the first half to you today. And this poses a problem. So what I've done is I've interspersed pictures of really cute animals throughout the talk, and as things get darker, so if you start feeling blue or depressed or heat stroke, just kind of tune out my words and look at the pictures until you want to come back in, all right? I want to start with an analogy. In the 1950s in the United States, we performed a kind of grand social experiment almost by accident. We decided to test what happens if you give every family a car. President Eisenhower had been really impressed with the German Autobahn during the war, so he decided the United States needed a grand network of interstate highways. And over 35 years, we built 75,000 kilometers of this stuff. If you want to be glib, and I do, you can think of it as the internet for cars. Ooh. All these little road networks that had been not connected before suddenly are joined together in a big, cohesive whole, and it enabled all these phenomena that people hadn't imagined before, like fast food that had nationwide distribution and was standardized. Or this beautiful thing, the shopping mall. This is from when people still gave a shit. You can see that little attempt at architecture in the middle. This is 1957. And then, of course, the landscape that we most associate with American car culture, the suburbs. To people who are early adopters, the suburbs were amazing. They combined kind of the best aspects of living in the country. You had clean air, a little piece of land, a house, but you could also go work in the city. And at the end of the day, you had a car that gave you total freedom. You could go anywhere you wanted to. Everybody went on their little Sunday drives. And it took a while to work out the fact that building an entire country and landscape around cars had some negative effects as well, right? We learned about gridlock. We turned Los Angeles into a big pot of smog like nobody had thought of before. And we created one of the more boring landscapes that there are. It turns out that when everybody has a car, everybody needs a car. This thing that used to be a source of freedom just becomes like a cage, right? It's important for my talk to stress that the people who built this landscape didn't really want to do it or didn't think about it in those terms. They built the roads and the cars, and somehow this landscape happened, all right? Maybe they just didn't have an alternate vision for what a world with cars could be. Maybe they thought it was technologically inevitable that you're just going to get what you ended up with. And so, we got what we ended up with. All of us here are early adopters. We've benefited from it. The fact that we're at this conference shows it. Our idea is what happens if we give everyone access to the internet, give everyone a magical device that gets them online. And over the last few years, we've been exploring the consequences of that, and we're starting to see the murky outlines of the world that we're headed towards, the world that we're building. And it doesn't look that great. Yeah, there we go. It's kind of scary. It's very dehumanizing. And so I want to talk about what it would take to, veer off this path and create an internet that's more human. I want to argue about some things that I think are really broken, and then if we have time, I'm going to pull the plane out of the dive and try to, aim it upwards for the last bit of the talk. So my big gripe with the internet is that it just can't forget. It has this memory problem, and nobody's really thinking about fixing it. Here's an idealized depiction of my childhood in America. In elementary school, I have no idea if they do this in Germany, but they used to scare us. If we did something particularly heinous, particularly awful, they would say, this is going on your permanent record. And that was scary to me in elementary school because I imagined I could see it in my mind, you know. It was red, very thick, and it had lots of stamps, you know, and it was just going to be passed along from high school to college to whoever I wanted to marry, you know, to the person that put me in the ground. They would all examine my permanent record. And there was this feeling of incredible liberation when you realized around 5th grade that this is just bullshit. They were bluffing. You can do anything you want. They do not check. So, you know, how depressing to grow up and then be part of the generation that implements the goddamn permanent record for all of us. Because of course we've done it, you know? It's no secret that all of the stuff we do online, not just the things we voluntarily put out there, but all the actions we take in passing, everything we click on or, you know, type into a box and don't even autocomplete, it's all stored somewhere. And as a developer, what irritates me is that this is done mostly out of fear, right? Here's a beautiful piece of old core memory. So the reason all of this stuff is stored permanently is that as programmers, we're trained to be terrified of computers' capacity to forget stuff. Because computers don't forget like you and me. If you were a computer, you might wake up tomorrow and not remember your name, and that would be normal. They make no distinction between what's important and what's trivial. Nothing fades away. It's either there in, you know, its verbatim completeness or totally gone. And as programmers, you know, we are taught to keep everything and log everything because you never know. Not to overwrite anything because you might make a mistake. Our folklore is full of stories of clobbering crucial data, you know, and losing your job over it. Nothing in our programmer folklore warns about the dangers of keeping too much stuff. All we focus on is data loss. And so we've managed to kind of port this, well, I call it a bug. We ported this bug from the internet into our online lives now. It's as if, you know, we were so oppressed by the fact that computers only understood binary and couldn't really understand floating point that we just decided we're going to use integers from now on as a society because, you know, we can't, the computers don't let us do otherwise. So always at the forefront of these, you know, stupid experiments in bringing the online world that sucks into the real world that's still awesome is Google. I don't know how many presentations this slide has appeared in. Robert Scoble is a genius self-promoter, so I'm going to replace him with this guy while I talk. You know, we've divided our online world and our offline world. So online, we're used now to the fact that everything is logged. That's one reason that Facebook, which in theory is a site that's full of your best friends, you know, is still such like a cold and off-putting environment because everybody knows they have to be on good behavior. It's all logged forever. Versus offline. Like, I saw everybody here having lots of conversations yesterday out in the world. But if I produced a transcript of everything you guys had said, it would be extremely creepy. You know, we just don't do that. And even when we want to record something, we have all these little social cues. You raise a camera and so on. And Google has looked at that and said, you know, wake up, Grandpa. Privacy is dead. From now on, we're going to be wearing devices that can record permanently and without warning. And you're just going to have to get used to it because it's a new world. Right? This is kind of the approach they've taken. They've taken a bug, which is complete inability to forget in a human-like way, and called it a feature. And you can do this. You can also take, you know, dog crap and put it in the freezer and call it ice cream. But people are going to be able to taste the difference. And people are tasting the difference. So fear is like one of the things that drives our inability to forget stuff online. The other thing, though, is hubris. It's this dream. You guys have all seen this in TV. You know, you start with a satellite picture of the Earth, and then someone hits enhance. And eventually, you know, you're looking at a license plate, and then you're looking at the bacteria on the license plate. It's this dream that with enough data, if we can just collect enough, and if we can just think hard enough and come up with cool algorithms, anything becomes possible. You know, it's kind of the programmer's disease. Everything is hackable. If you tap it in the right spot, the world unfolds before you like a flower, and it just requires that, you know, that special hack. But to do it, you have to collect everything, because you don't know where that information is until you figure it out. And it's true that with enough data, anything becomes possible. We're living this dream. This has been making the rounds. I'm so sorry. I wanted to credit it, but I didn't put it in my notes. You know, wonderful list of correlations. This is a graph of suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation compared to the number of lawyers in North Carolina. And if you see, the correlation is, you know, 9937%. This is an extremely powerful correlation. You could publish scientific papers on You could explain, like, why does that bump happen? Well, maybe there was a rope sale or something, and kind of run with it. When you have enough data, like, you can find anything at all that you want in it. But we can't seem to get past that. All right. Second thing that I'm going to whine about, the web has a center. When the web first started, we kind of pictured it like this. It was a big hot mess of hyperlinks and hypertext. The first browsers came with authoring environments, so you could actually write as well as read stuff on the web. And there weren't any points of control, really. By design, the thing was chaotic so that no one company or even one country could co-opt it, because it was just too big. You couldn't get your arms around the web, even when it was young. And of course, we've thrown that all away, and the web right now looks like this. There's a center. We have one search engine. We have one analytics suite. We have one social network. All of these things have focused. And of course, when you get this kind of architecture, you get this kind of guy, shows up in the middle because it's a good place to be. Things happen here. Again, I don't want you to stare at a spider. I'm going to replace it with cute bats in pockets. Okay? Yeah, aren't they nice? So we have this really, really centralized web, and now we're moving to the world of mobile devices, right? So of course we have two families of devices. One of them pretends to be open, the other doesn't, but they're both kind of the same thing. And on top of it, we've added, or below it, we've added an infrastructure layer that we refer to as the cloud. The cloud. I love the whole concept of the cloud because of the distance between, what it is and what it claims to be. Let's just admire this piece of stock art for a minute. I have so many questions, right? Like, the guy's wearing a suit. He's climbed up on a rock. He's holding a laptop in full sunlight. Clearly, this is a man desperate to get a Wi-Fi signal by any means necessary. Is this really the image you want to project for the cloud? Yeah, I don't know. And it's worth noting. So the cloud, it pretends to be the astral plane of computing. You can be lifted up from the cares and woes of the everyday physical world and just think about your computing abstractions while the rest is taking care of you silently. Where in reality, what the cloud is just a bunch of data centers somewhere that they don't really even want you to know the exact locations of, run by a private American company. That's the cloud. And we don't know its security properties. Amazon is really good at telling us like great bedtime stories about the cloud. They claim, I believe, 11 nines of durability. The sun will be a black cinder before one bit flips in the picture you've stored on S3. According to Amazon, you're not supposed to worry about the cloud. But of course, it's almost like the banking crisis. If enough people use this thing, then when it finally fails, it's not going to be anybody's fault. It's just going to be a crisis. The centralization is weird, right? Like, consider Google. Google makes devices that are hardware. It also makes an OS. It makes a browser. It makes a DNS service. And of course, it has all these websites. You can have a full end-to-end browsing experience on Google now that if Microsoft had attempted it in 1999, there would have been rioting in the streets. But it's a different time now. We've grown used to this centralization. All right. But of course, the centralization sucks because everybody is a spy. I've been really enjoying watching Silicon Valley freak out over the idea that the American government is performing the same kind of bulk data collection that is their entire reason of being. They're shocked. Like, they're clutching their pearls that how can the government do what we do? It's bad. And they've written open letters. It's really dramatic, right? I'm delighted that the government has been shown to be spying on us because I think it'll finally make us get off our butts a little bit. And it's really hard to persuade people of the extent of bulk data collection, but when the government does it, they're so ham-handed about it, it makes the argument a lot easier. I think there's no difference in principle. It doesn't matter who's collecting the data. Because if someone collects that data anywhere and it's interesting enough, the government will find a way in. And of course, you're thinking of people, on like silent zip lines and black ninja masks, right? Or hacking the routers. But you just have to ask for it, right? Like, we've already seen right after September 11th, the Bush administration just went up to our telecoms and said, hey, do you mind if we tap all your data? And they're like, dude, just put it in here in the rack. There was one telco that said no, and of course, they've been in court ever since, secret court, sorry. Not supposed to talk about that. So yeah, A, they'll just ask for it, right? B, the internet establishment and the intelligence establishment are part of the same establishment. They're the same people. The guy who did Facebook security now works at NSA. Dropbox has just put Condoleezza Rice, one of the architects of the Iraq War, onto its board. This is it's a buddy system out there. I'm kind of being mean because I'm half American, half not. Americans have this tendency to believe that the rule of law is like a law of physics. It just, as long as the secret police are obeying the secret laws because the secret courts makes them do that, then our democracy is safe. I think that's a really dangerous belief. If you look at what just happened in Russia, where the main social network suddenly gets a phone call, I want 2 of my best friends to be on the board, can you make that happen? And suddenly, that entire data set is in government hands. It's not so far-fetched to me. Maybe because I've seen what's happened in Poland and other countries. Americans think it's impossible. But I'll grant it, okay? You don't have to be afraid of jackbooted thugs and the FBI and NSA and all these federal agencies. All it takes is like this guy. He's the mayor of Peoria, Illinois. His name is Jim Ardis. Peoria is a town that's about as big as my finger in Illinois. Jim Ardis recently saw a Twitter account that was making fun of him. And of course, he deployed the full might of the law. He served warrants on Twitter and Comcast to find out where this criminal lived, and then he got a search warrant for his house and for his computers so that he could take him into custody. In the process, the guy's poor roommate who had a big bag of weed is now on drug charges because that was found. So, you don't have to be afraid of the American federal government or American state government. American municipal government is already scary enough. My point is that these collections of data attract people like this, like bees, All right, there we go. So, but I worry that, we're talking a lot about surveillance and in terms of like what the government's going to do to you misses an important point. There's a lot of other scenarios that are kind of creepy and scary that don't get as much attention. Like what happens, I'm going to use Facebook as an example, and I'm going to pretend that Facebook really respects your privacy and is full of people who are good intentioned, because that strengthens my argument. So let's just assume that as a given. So what happens in 5 years when Facebook goes bankrupt? If you look at the history of social networks, they don't last that long. Maybe give them 10 years or 15, but still, what happens when they're bought by Rupert Murdoch? What happens when they're bought by a credit agency or when they're taken private by a hedge fund? Where does that data go? In 2004, I was a big Friendster user. Anybody here use Friendster back in the day? Was that a thing at all in Germany? You guys did, right. Yeah, I posted a lot of stuff. I was dating people. I had photos up there. Like, where's all that data now? Where did it go? I like how this new version of Friendster, which is apparently some sort of multiplayer game, has a login with Facebook button so you can repeat your mistake again, as many times as you need to learn it. Or how about this? 6 Degrees. Anybody ever heard of 6 Degrees? You guys again, some of you. Yeah, that was like the original social network in 1999. Domain doesn't even resolve now, right? Like, where is all that data? So the idea that we can just pump all this data and also allow these companies to track behavioral data willy-nilly and it's going to be okay, I think is a dangerous one, right? Or what happens if Facebook hires its own Edward Snowden, someone who for ideological reasons believes, hey, we need to release all this data to the world? What happens if they hire an incompetent sysadmin in the next 50 years? Given that 50 years is the time horizon they're looking now for storing data with Blu-ray, in that time, one person that leaves the door open, right? Or maliciously allows the site to be penetrated. What if they hire the guy from AOL? Remember him? He released 3 months of anonymized search stats, search queries from everybody. That was really a fun adventure because it was very quickly apparent that you could deduce people's physical location, real names, all sorts of stuff from their search history. Raise your hand if you'd be comfortable having your Google search history published. Anybody here? Really? No Bing users at all? All right. Yeah, I didn't think so, right? Okay, sorry, time for happy thoughts. This is a selfie, isn't that awesome? A monkey just found a camera and made that happen. I love that photo, all right. all of us want to be wearing this. If you can't read it, it's the MedAlert bracelet that says, in case you find my dead body, delete my browser history, right? And like Eric Schmidt at Google would say, well, if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be afraid of all this tracking. But of course we all have stuff that we don't want to be public. All right. So you guys are a German audience, so you understand this a little more viscerally than other people might, because you recently had the experience of having to incorporate this mass of private files and data from the former East German Secret Service and, during reunification and figure out what to do with it. Like, who got to look at it, who got to vet it, what were the fair rules for dealing with this stuff? I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what happened in Poland because I know that situation better, but it's kind of similar. This is a wonderful, famous photo. That's our prime minister, one of a pair of twins, and the other twin was president. That was cool. And then his government. And this is a very good representation of what their policies are like. But anyway, like as soon as the Polish secret police collected all this stuff too, from 1945 all the way to 1989, and then ever since it's been a political hot potato. What do you do with all these files, these secret files? Well, some of the files are just secret policeman. It's a Friday, he has to go home, so he makes some shit up about 3 people, picked at random, and now it's in the files. Some of the files are about students who were young and got scared during an interrogation. Some of them are about people who just happen to know somebody abroad. There's a mix, and some of them are police informants. So you have everything possible mixed together, and then succeeding governments that have tried and failed to vet it and publish it as a sort of national reconciliation. And we've had governments actually fall over this. So this kind of data, this personal data, is powerful stuff. But to give you an even less political example and a more relevant one to the things we have on the web, there was a thing in Poland called Project Hyacinth, really creepy name. I think it was in the 70s and 80s, and it created these files that we call the pink files. The police department collected information on citizens it thought were gay or lesbian and created files for every one of them. So there's about 11,000 of these files. The interesting thing about them is that every government since the fall of communism has agreed that they should be destroyed. It violates human rights to have this information. There was no other reason to collect this except to use it as blackmail. But we can't quite get ourselves to delete them. They're hard to find. Someone lost them for a few years. Now they've been found again, but the police department is saying, well, it's going to take 200 man-years to delete this. We just don't have it in the budget. So this is kind of just, and now people are refusing to even accept them physically because they're such a toxic thing. So this is really like an issue that we're going to grapple with too as soon as one of these larger social networks goes back. And I promise there's an animal coming soon. First, there's going to be Lech Wałęsa, who I think, to me, this was the height of the insanity in Poland, is when people started accusing Wałęsa of having been a secret agent as well. And there's convincing evidence that when he was a young man, he was tempted by the secret police. All I have to say is that if he was a secret agent of communism, then that was the worst employment decision that had ever been made, because he didn't just bring communism down in Poland, but throughout Eastern Europe. But that's the level our discourse sank to because of all these files and rumors of files. Hey! Yeah, I know. It's probably moments before the cameraman was eaten, but still, it looks really, looks really cute. So this personal data that's being collected, it's a lot like radioactive waste, It's really easy to generate it. And it's you have reasons you might amass it, but then it's incredibly toxic and almost impossible to dispose of. And most importantly, it has a lifetime that's on scales much greater than what we're used to dealing with. Internet companies are around for 2 or 3 years, maybe 10 years if they're lucky. But this stuff lasts a lifetime. And maybe longer than a lifetime if you're worried about what your kids find out. So, I think we have to really think about what we're collecting and what we're allowing to be collected. All right. I'm going to depress you now from a different direction altogether. I want to talk about why we're collecting these things, which of course has something to do with advertising. I want to persuade you that the foundations of our industry are rotten. I'm really heavy, huh? The very fabric of existence is a lie. Yeah, I guess I thought for Germany I had to ham it up, but I may have gone too far. Anyway, I do believe that the foundations of the web are kind of rotten because we've built them on this advertising sort of thing. So before the web came along, advertising was simple. It didn't, it was a big mystery. You got a budget, you went to Don Draper. Don Draper, thought for a moment, came up with an idea. Let's say that cigarettes prevent you from getting fat. All right, you sign the check, and then in the next quarter, you look at your sales figures, and if they went up, that means the ad campaign worked. The internet changed the lives of advertisers. Suddenly, you know who's seeing your ads. You can target them by gender, age, location, declared interest, anything you want. And of course, we know what happened. Everybody went crazy. One of the first banner ads had a click-through rate of 78%. 78. Does anybody know the 2 words that were on that banner ad? Nope. Not click here. Shop naked. Click. But banner ads are like poison ivy. You click them once and then you learn never to touch them again. So of course the entire industry collapsed shortly thereafter. You remember perhaps the era of interstitials and pop-unders, pop-overs, pop-throughs, that whole desperate mess. Until Google came along and discovered AdWords and AdSense, that people would actually click on these contextual text ads. And everybody climbed onto that lifeboat. And to some extent, our industry has been on that boat ever since. But it's not fair to say that, that our industry is based on advertising. It's based on 2 things. Advertising is one of them, and the other is related to advertising but doesn't have a name, so I'm going to call it investor story time. Right? And I'll explain how they're related in a moment. So advertising, we all know how it works. Someone pays you money to tell your users how great a product or service is. And if you run an ad network, it's like a casino. You make a ton of money that way. If you don't run an ad network and have an ad-supported site, the experience of advertising is a little more grim. You and your users go to the altar, and you put the user data on the altar, and you burn it to AdSense. And if AdSense is pleased, it rains down money. And if AdSense is displeased, it stops raining money. And you really don't know why or how, and your users don't either. And sometimes maybe you pray to the intercessionary saint, Matt Cutts, the only person who speaks with a human voice from the great Empyrean. So that's the experience of online advertising. And of course, users hate advertising, so you're constantly chasing them with new and more intrusive ways of tricking them into clicking on stuff, basically. Like you may have seen this stuff lately. The latest fad is these fake related links, right? My favorite of these is a reminder, don't touch dead sharks. Thank you. 5 weird reasons you're still broke. 1 comes to mind, you don't have any money. And of course, the top 5 regrets people make on their deathbed, probably number 3 is clicking that link, so I'm not going to do it. Are there animals coming? No, you're going to have to wait. I ran low. All right. So that's the fraught business of advertising. Let's talk about investor story time. So advertising is when someone pays you to tell users to buy a product or service. Investor story time is when someone pays you to tell them how rich they're going to be when you put ads on your website in the future. Investor story time is really, really lucrative. Scheherazade comes to mind as one person who spin these stories and go on for years. I happen to favor King Lear. There's this great quote from King Lear. It says, "I will do such things, what they are, yet I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth." And that's basically the pitch that startups make to investors. When we put advertising on the site, you're not going to believe how awesome it's going to be and how much money we're going to make. Quora is kind of my pet example because they're so brazen about it. Quora now has a $900 million valuation, and they just got an $80 million check. Their stated purpose is, if you don't know Quora is a site that you ask a question and someone answers it who has domain expertise. They went into an investor meeting and they basically said, we don't want to sully our hands with revenue yet, we want to grow. Our main competitor is Wikipedia, a site that it's not just broke, it has to have a fund drive to get broke. That's how little revenue, it makes negative revenue, and that's our main competitor. And our business model is we're going to put ads on it sometime, and they walked out of there with a check. So compare the effectiveness of investor story time with traditional advertising. Of course, rational startups are going to choose that path. And I don't begrudge them. I'm happy with anything that takes money out of the pockets of venture capitalists. It's great. The problem, though, is investor story time is this motor that's driving ever more intrusive forms of advertising, that's forcing us to increase data collection. When you see things like a cash register that has emotion detection, so it can, if you recoil in horror at the Snickers bar, it can note that and put it in a database. That's all driven by this need to tell better stories about how advertising someday isn't going to suck and people are actually going to click on it. Remember that guy from Robin's talk? He had the full face goggles, and he's like, I can't wait till these block ads, right? Like, what an idiot. They're not going to block ads. They're going to put ads on everything. The world's going to look like Formula One to you, because that's the logic of, that's driving these giant valuations and causing people to write enormous checks. All right, this is my cat, Buster. He's so fuzzy that I can never get a focused photo of him, and this is how he spends most of his days, just on his back, belly to the world. Just look at Buster for a minute. Before I came here, I spent a couple of weeks making notes on what YouTube was showing me as advertising. I figured, the greatest minds of my generation have created this targeted advertising system. If anything is good, YouTube's targeted advertising is going to be good, because I'm logged into YouTube, I'm logged into Google, they have 10 years of my search history, they know everything about me. So let's see what these vaunted targeted ads that we're collecting all this behavioral data to generate are really like. So what did I see? I saw an ad for Geico, which is a car insurance company that I already have a policy from. Okay. I saw ads for Red Lobster, a kind of crappy chain seafood restaurant that doesn't have any branches in San Francisco where I live. That's strike two. I saw a lot of this woman. I forget her name, but she has a makeup channel on YouTube and is really aggressive about getting me to think deeply about foundation. I saw an ad for a Pixies album, the new Pixies album. This is actually a well-targeted ad. I went and I got a torrent for it right away. So this one won. And then I saw an ad for, I forget what this is called. It's something like, relaxations. It's an $85,000 a month rehab clinic in Malibu. And finally, this is the one that made me really angry. I saw an ad for Zipcar. I have nothing against Zipcar. Zipcar is a car sharing service where you pay by the hour. The reason it made me angry is I can forgive all the other sins of targeting, but you just showed me car insurance ads, and now you're like, do I have a car or don't I? Can you just make up your mind, oh, YouTube targeting engine? And it can't. It doesn't think that deeply. So of course the answer to this is, if the ads aren't targeted well, help us improve the targeting. Google has a special interface you can go to fix your, they call them preferences. It tells you what Google thinks you are, and you can kind of adjust that. To me, it's like telling the firing squad to point your gun a little bit more to the right. But in the interest of science, I went there, I looked at it, and this is what I found out. Google, which has known me since I was but a child, thinks that I am a female, 25 to 34, Arabic-speaking woman. So that's Google's deduction about my identity. All right? I've created an artist rendering. Google, in my list of interests, Google includes babies and toddlers, meat and seafood, and Greater Cleveland. So this is their picture after years and years. This is the state of the art of web advertising. I don't want to look at this anymore. Let's look at the walrus, right? And that's an appropriate reaction face. Okay. And this is part of the perversity of all this data collection, is that investor story time actually benefits if the current ad targeting always sucks, because it means you can tell better stories. You just say, well, we just need more data. Well, the technology's improving. We're going to get a better algorithm. You just hang in there, investor. Keep the money coming. And by the time we put ads on our site, they're going to know that he's a 38-year-old Polish-American guy with no children who is, to be fair, interested in meat and seafood. But that is a harmful mechanic because it drives all of this data collection. And we're basically addicted to it. We're addicted to accumulating this radioactive waste that we have no way to dispose of later. All right. I have almost 10 minutes to bring this back up, so I'm really psyched. Let me tell you what I think we should do, and hopefully you'll tell me where I'm wrong and right later. I'm not sure I have the right answers, but this is at least a beginning that I came up with. The first thing and the most important thing that I think we have to do is regulate this stuff. All right? This is also from the 50s. It was a different time. We have to come up with regulations. And You know, the European Union has a much better head start than we do. In the States, there's basically nothing right now. And even the regulations that we're considering would apply to US persons only. So they would protect me, but mean absolutely nothing for most of you. I mean, you can tell how much we respect the privacy rights of the German internet user by seeing how we respect the privacy rights of the German Prime Minister. Not so much, right? So let's start with the otter. Well, no, let's stay on this one. The first thing is I think we have to regulate the kind of behavioral data that companies can store. When I say behavioral data, I don't mean stuff like you uploaded a photo or you posted a message. I mean stuff like they noticed you typed in a search query, or you clicked something, or you walked by a garbage can and your phone, got sniffed by the garbage can, which happened in London recently. All this data that you just collect in passing, cell tower stuff, that goes into databases and never comes out. Limit what can be collected. And this has to be regulated not at the collection point, because companies will be very devious about how they collect it, but where it's stored. You regulate the database. You can collect anything you want. You can do facial detection, whatever, but you can't store it except for these limited cases. Second, limit how long you can keep that information. 1 month, 3 months, 3 years, I don't know. It can be, we can discuss it, but it can't be forever. It can't be 50 years. Delete it after a certain amount of time. Furthermore, let users opt out if something's acquired or goes bankrupt. You guys know this experience. You trust a little website, you give them a bunch of data that you would rather not share with Microsoft or Yahoo. The next day you read in the press it's been acquired by Microsoft or Yahoo. And there's no recourse, there's no takebacks. You can't write a nice email saying, hey, could I undo what I did? All right. My notes are with the mouse, so I'm going to go to the mouse. He's holding a teddy bear. We need privacy policies that actually have teeth. So right now, I run a bookmarking website. I can't promise my users that I'm going to, that I'll never sell this site. I can't promise them that I'll never sell their data for ads. I can do it all I want on my blog, but I can't make a binding legal promise to them that they can trust. Most terms of service and privacy policies include a weasel clause that says this can change at any time. Why are you even reading it, right? And they're not legally enforceable. So we need to create a mechanism where companies can make actual binding promises. People need the right to download their stuff. In America, we have these horrible credit agencies. There's 3 of them, and they decide whether you're creditworthy or not. But once a year, it's like magic. In Poland, we believe that once a year, animals on Christmas Eve spoke with a human voice. Well, once a year in America, you're allowed to ask the credit bureau to give you what they have on you, and it's always full of mistakes. We need a similar mechanism for websites. If it's your data, you should be able to get it. Again, I didn't put his name in my presenter notes, but there's that fantastic law student from Austria who took advantage of the fact that Facebook picked a headquarters in Ireland for tax reasons and just pummeled them with lawsuits until they had to spit out a 1,000-page PDF of all his personal data. And now he's creating a framework so that everybody else can try to get that same stuff out. I think this is really important. Not just because it helps make people aware of all the things that are collected on them, but because it will force sites to actually re-architect the way they store and collect this stuff to make it less painful to spit out. And I'm also speaking of my own site. I'm an equal offender. It's easy to build things in a way that ignore privacy concerns with backups and things that are stored long term. And finally, the right to delete. You should be able to say, hey, Google, delete me. And they should say, okay. End of story. Right? I think it's important not to try to backport the physical world onto the internet. These rights should apply to everybody. Whether you have to pass the laws in some country, but they shouldn't differentiate between citizens of that country and the rest of the world. It makes no sense to have a big debate in the United States right now about NSA surveillance and all that, and none of it applies to people who are outside the U.S. It's jingoistic and selfish. We can't do it. And finally, we should have a mechanism for letting people opt in if they want to break any of these rules that I outlined. Because if this targeted advertising and this invasive monitoring is so effective, if it brings so much value to my life to see ads for products and services I'm going to love, then convince me to opt in. If you're so good at advertising, you should be able to sell me on it, right? Why do you have to force me into all these things? Make me do it of my own free will. I really appreciated Bastian's talk yesterday about decentralization. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow at Decentralized Camp, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I want to make a distinction between two kinds of decentralization that are important. One of them is this idea that you have services that make no sense sometimes living on one big fat server. Years from now, we're going to wonder, like, why did 7 billion people, sign up to Facebook and all interact there? It's as if there was one bar in Düsseldorf, and if we wanted to hang out with each other, we all had to go there, or one bar in Germany, right? Oh, I'm taking the train because I want to go to the bar. And then once you get in there, there's cameras and microphones everywhere, and people interrupt your conversations to try to sell you stuff. That's like the vibe of Facebook online, right? It makes no sense. Social interactions should be with the people you interact with, so they should be decentralized by nature. People should have their own local services that can interact. Bastian outlined a really clever way to do that in one way. The other kind of decentralization, though, is intermediate, taking these really big monopoly corporations and at least breaking them into a couple of pieces. If you remember the days of when Internet Explorer was the only browser going, compare that to today when we have 4 browser vendors. It's better, right? It's better to have competition. Google is better because Microsoft, at an incredible loss, has decided to run Bing, forever and ever. Apple Maps may have sucked, but they're making Google Maps better, and Apple's going to give, so when you have at least a couple of players, it's far, far better than having a monopolist. And in a lot of areas of tech now, we have a monopoly or are in danger of having one. And then I've always wanted to have a Death to America slide. Maybe I'll change that. There we go. De-Americanize. I don't want to have painful conversations coming home at the border. We need to de-Americanize the internet. I'm required by law as a naturalized citizen to be a patriotic American, and our country is the finest country on earth. But we owe it to the world to let them have at least 1 or 2 of these internet giants to themselves. It's just selfish to hog everything and have it all be there. And if for no other reason than, because California is kind of a shaky place to build an entire industry on. This is where I live, the San Francisco Bay Area. These horrible colors represent increasing dangers of earthquake and liquefaction and stuff. And basically all of Silicon Valley, all of these giants are located where that no problem text balloon is coming from. Now, of course, their data is backed up in infinity places. But it's not going to matter much when there's a giant earthquake and nobody can get to work for a month, to all these company headquarters. You're going to feel the effects. So even if you don't believe any of my political stuff, I think just geology is also on my side. We need to decentralize it a little bit. All right. We're fine. Right? All right. And finally, we have to relax and not worry, We can fix this. I don't know how, but we can just keep trying stuff until it's fixed. The important part is to kind of recognize there's a problem and agree. You guys are designers. You can treat it as a design challenge. How do you make a livable world online? If you have kids, think about what kind of world you want them to inhabit. I'm hoping that we can kind of get out of the funk of the past year where we've all been really depressed by this, Orwell stuff that was revealed, and start thinking about ways we can make a difference. Yesterday, looking at Robin's talk, I was amazed because it had been so long since I was really inspired by tech demos. I'm so used to thinking in terms of privacy invasion and dangers and data collection, and here's this tech that's just being used for good. And it occurred to me that if we didn't have to worry about privacy, we could do so much more. We could do so much more. People will say, well, you don't have to worry about privacy. That's cool, but I mean it the other way. If we could have guarantees that stuff is ephemeral, it's not going to be saved forever, then imagine the world we can build. But it's going to take some work to guarantee that. Finally, I want to just thank some people who helped me vet my presentation: Britta Gustafson, Matt Howey, Diane Person, Sasha Judd, and Thomas Ptacek. And I want to thank all of you guys for having me and listening to me in this last hot talk of the day. I'm going to put my notes up there tomorrow if you want to see them. And thanks so much to Mark for inviting me. Everybody go where it's cool.